Now, I want to take you back to 1979, right here in Montreal at a Bob Marley concert. My mother, a French Canadian woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, meets my father, a Jamaican man from St. Elizabeth, Jamaica, the countryside, and they meet at the Forum of Montreal at this Bob Marley concert, and they fall in love and they get married. And the basis of them meeting, despite my father's nappy hair and my mother's straight hair, despite my father's patois and my mother's French, despite my father's skin tone and my mother's skin tone, the fictitious divisions in society erase at that Bob Marley concert. And those are the very etchings of the DNA in which I was born, whereby there is an environment that is loving, that's tolerant, that's also rebellious, that's rhythmic. And how can we create a society that is somewhat similar to that concert, whereby the fictitious divisions in society erased? And as you know, in Quebec, divisions of language, divisions of race are prominent. And the question is, and the mission that I've had from the very beginning of my life, and we will go through this, is once again, how do you erase those fictitious divisions in society? So my mother and father get married. I am born July 20th, 1983. And 10 years, in 10 months after I am born, my mother moves to an ashram, a spiritual Hindu school and community south of the border in West Virginia. And I had a few pictures of me in my monk clothes. Unfortunately, you can't see them because of the screen, but I am living in this idyllic community where I am learning how to meditate, how to breathe. I am learning tolerance. I am a vegetarian. I meditate. I am taking cold showers in the morning, living like a monk. And at the age of 10 years old, my life flips and turns upside down. I go from living in an ashram where materialism is not a factor, where spirituality is your roots, where your connection to the environment, to God and to people around you is the foundation of your existence. And all of a sudden, I come to Montreal and I go into a welcome class. And in that welcome class, I begin to realize that I am poor. I never experienced that before in the ashram. I begin to realize that I am a visible minority. I never understood what that was prior to coming to Canada in 1993. I begin to realize that my identity has a huge factor and is a huge, at times, liability in society. And the envelope is pushed a little further. In 1995, during the referendum, and if you're unaware of it, if you're not from Quebec, in 1995, there was a referendum whereby Canadians, specifically Quebecers, had to decide whether they were going to separate from Canada or not. I moved to Boisbriand. Boisbriand is a suburb north of the island of Montreal. And that is where I have a true culture shock. For the first time in my life, I'm called the N-word. I was never aware that being a young spiritual boy by the name of Balarama, who grew up in an ashram, can all of a sudden be labeled the N-word. And people ask me, where are you from? And I say, I'm from Montreal, I'm from here. No, where are you really from? And then it begins to be very clear to me that I don't fit the mythical norm of what it means to be Canadian or what it means to be Quebecer. And that mythical norm, as you can, well establish, is going to be white, male, and French. And it was very clear to me at a very young age that I did not fit that mythical norm. And then people would ask me, what's your name? I'd say, Balarama. No. What's your name? I'd say, Balarama. And they said, that's what is that? And then I had a teacher rename me and say, you would be better off. In a very odd way, we're going to give you Stephen. And if you remember the 60s scoop in the Indigenous communities, or if you remember the way that Indigenous communities were assimilated to Canadian society, well, that was effectively what was happening to me in a white suburb called Boisbriand right here in Montreal. And then I began to rebel. As I age and I understand that people who look like me are on the margins, people who look like me are associated with criminality, people who look like me are 4 to 5 times more likely to be intercepted by the police. Well, I began to rebel. I began to fight. I began to drink and smoke weed with my friends. And I fail out of secondary 4 at Jean 23 in the West Island. 55s and 59s and 58s across the board. And this is where my life changed. It's October. I'm 17 years old, and I'm watching Monday Night Football, and I see a defensive back that's 5'11", 180 pounds, and his skin tone looks just like mine. I'm 5'11", 180 pounds. And I see this defensive back, and I said, I can do that. And at that very moment, my life changed. I ended up going to adult education to finish my high school, and I enrolled at John Abbott College. And the coach, Dennis Wade, says, you could be a running back. And I said, no, I'm going to be a defensive back. He's like, what are you talking about? You're bigger, you're stronger, you're faster than all these kids in Kirkland and Beaconsfield and the AA program. You're going to be a running back. I said, coach, I'm a DB. I played at John Abbott College. I continued my bad behaviors, continued smoking, continued drinking. And the only reason why I can tell this publicly, because the New York Times published it, I was handcuffed and put in back of a cop car. I had to plead with the cop to let me go because my life could have taken a serious and negative turn. And after John Abbott College, having not graduated John Abbott College, because I didn't have enough credit after 3 years, but I could tell you the kind of student that I was, I get another lucky break. Coach Denis Pichet from the University of Ottawa calls me as I'm sitting in my father's home in social housing with books everywhere, hoarding like you would not believe, living in social housing with my twin brother in a 3.5, having not worked all summer, do not have a CEGEP diploma. I get a call from the University of Ottawa, the head coach, saying, we recruited you, we would love to have you, where the hell are you? Why are you not in training camp? I said, coach, I didn't work all summer. I have no money, and I did not apply into the school. And from that moment, Denis Pichet said, get your butt here right now, got me into my program, got me into residence, gave me a job, and I got into the University of Ottawa. Now, I want to take a moment to pause to just show you the transition you can have from living in social housing, dropping out of high school, and the role that sports can play to get someone like me who was on a bad path onto the right path. And ultimately, sports became the means through which I was going to emancipate myself or empower myself. Now, there's a missing link. There's something missing, and that's education. After my first semester at the University of Ottawa, it was clear to me that people that looked like me were not represented in the professor makeup, were not represented in the curriculums, were not represented in administration, were not represented in parliament, and overrepresented in the criminal justice system. And it's at that very moment, it was December 2004, after my first semester at the University of Ottawa, where I decided I was not only going to reach the CFL, excuse me, I was going to begin an educational revolution in my own life. I understood poverty, I understood materialism, I understood what it meant to have a parent on welfare, I understood what it meant to drop out of high school, and I began to empower myself through education. And as I progressed past the University of Ottawa, I came to a realization that not only was education was going to be my source of empowerment, my shield and my sword, but I was going to use it to remedy and to empower people around me. And now I'm going to put a parenthesis there, and I'm going to say something that relates to not just coaches, or excuse me, not just players, but coaches as well. If you provide a young boy with an initial experience of his identity is a liability, his name is a liability, the fact that he or she is poor is a liability, and that this person does not fit what it means to be a Canadian or a Quebecer, you can have and press upon this person a truly demeaning view of themselves, and they could underachieve. And what's happening right now in Quebec and in Canada, and when we speak about systemic racism, it goes well beyond employment data, well beyond underrepresentation and overrepresentation in prisons, or the misrepresentation in cultural spheres. It goes well beyond that. The foundation of all that is, how do people of color identify with themselves, and the erosion of their confidence, the erosion of their dignity and their self-worth. And if you just take that for a moment and pause, now consider yourself a coach when you have players under you. And I'm going to draw an analogy between the state and how the state can have a demeaning view on society, and the power a coach can have on the identity of players. Now let's turn it positive. Imagine you are a coach and you're doing everything in your power to strengthen the confidence, the identity, and the self-worth of your players. In the same way that the state or a court or police officer can have a demeaning view and press upon minorities and have them erode their sense of confidence, well, a coach can do the same thing, and it can go positive or negative. So when you miss that drive layup and it hits the backboard and bounces off the rim, and your coach says, I believe in you, you're staying in the game, and you do it again and you still miss, and he still believes in you, and you finally get it, now you've built trust, you've built confidence, and you've inspired that player and empowered that player. And the biggest difference between minorities and majority, it's not just economic, it's how they view themselves. Hence why Bob Marley said, free yourself from mental slavery. So the teams that win or lose, it's not the teams, in my view, with the best skills. It's not the teams, in my view, with the best strategy. It's the teams that have coaches that can inspire players to believe in themselves and for players to believe in each other. And that's what differentiates winning teams from losing teams, or championship teams from teams at the bottom of the basement of any league. And if I can give you one concrete example, when I was with the Montreal Alouettes, with Anthony Calvillo, and this, as you know, Anthony Calvillo, if you don't know him, is a Hall of Fame quarterback in the CFL, and Ben Cahoon and Jamal Richardson. There is no hierarchy in the locker room. There is no playing games with rookies. If I need to get medical treatment before Anthony Calvillo, I get medical treatment before Anthony Calvillo because I simply happened to be there before he was. That's a championship team. Coach Trestman is not a football coach. He's more so a life coach that inspires confidence in all his players. Conversely, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in 2008 was the complete opposite. There was a lot of hierarchy. The rookies were getting bullied, and the coach had zero connection to the players. And that's the difference between a championship team and a team that's at the basement. Now, if we bring it back to society at large, the goal that Montreal in Action and the work that I have been doing for quite some time is understanding my experiences as a young boy that gets misnamed and misidentified versus what happens when you begin to instill confidence and power into this person. Well, things begin to change. And now I'm going to show you how I've used, and I wish we could see some of these pictures, that how I used my attributes and the confidence I built as an athlete into the real world. Now, imagine you play professional football, you are playing in front of 60,000 fans, you win a Grey Cup, and through injuries and other things, your career ends, and now you're in the real world. And you tell yourself, well, you need to do something that was bigger or better than being in the CFL. You can't just go work at some office job and expect to be happy. You were at the pinnacle of elite athletics. Now, what would you do? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about what I ended up doing with these two main ingredients, education and empowerment. After the CFL, I go to the University of Ottawa. I return there to get a teacher's college degree. Then I do a master's in education. And for everyone who's listening right now, you are students, then athletes. The student part is important. During my master's in education, I'm traveling the world doing research. I'm at a coffee shop in Cairo, and I read a sentence that says, low-income kids received low-income information. So throughout Canadian history and throughout the educational system, low-income students in high schools across Montreal and across Canada that are in low-income boroughs receive low-quality information. In other words, you're going to receive information that's going to allow you to become a receptionist, to become a blue-collar worker, and you are unlikely to be pushed to the heights of law, medicine, science, tech, engineering, math, finance, etc. And when I read that at that coffee shop in Cairo, that low-income kids received low-income information, I thought back to my high school, where I was a low-income kid that was failing out, uninspired, and receiving low-income information. And I took that very seriously. So what do you think I did? I decided to apply to the best law school in the nation. I came back to Canada in 2016 and applied to McGill Law. And now imagine, and got in and graduated. Now imagine if you gave and you empowered someone who experienced spirituality for 10 years in the ashram, who understands materialism, who understands racism, discrimination, identity, who understands all of these different things, and you give this person a source of empowerment and a tool of empowerment, such as education. What would happen? Well, change would start to arrive. So during my first year, like any good point guard, when you're driving to the hoop with your shoulder down and you don't care if it's a center or forward, you don't care who's in front of you, you're going to get the contact in the and one, you're going to the hoop. That's exactly what I did in regards to politics. It's my first year at McGill Law, and I decide to run in the borough that is the poorest in all of Canada, which is Montreal North. And if you take a look at the pandemic and the calculus of inequality, it created an epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is Montreal North, the very borough that I ran in 2017. So if you look at unemployment numbers, if you look at urban planning, the way we design our cities and provide access to transportation, to health, to grocery stores, if you look at policing, if you look at inequality or leisure and recreation and sports infrastructure, all of those inequalities and the calculus of that created an epicenter of COVID-19, which was the borough that I ran in 2017. Now, when you're driving to the hoop and you're getting that and one, you don't care if you're going to take a hit. You're going to have to take a hit. And when I ran for mayor of Montreal North, I knew I was going to get contact. I knew I wasn't going to win the election per se, but I was going to win the moral and ethical battle. So what I did, and this is what I want to impart onto you, is that following the election, I decide through the law, through the Montreal Charter, that I was going to launch a public consultation on systemic racism. And if you just pause for a moment, I just told you that after an election, I was going to launch a public consultation on systemic racism through the law. Just that in and of itself is the amalgamation of power of education and grit and the willingness to change the world, really in one sentence. I ran an election while I was at first year McGill law with 6 classes, and following that through the Montreal Charter, through a legal clause, I forced a public consultation on systemic racism, despite the fact that provincial government didn't want to. So now imagine, fantasize for a moment, if you gave young boys and girls who were low-income minorities, minorities across boroughs, across Canada, with sports infrastructure, with leisure, with recreation infrastructure, with quality education, and you empowered them through that education, what would happen? That same grit, passion, and resilience you have to survive poverty or to survive food insecurity. If you were to then provide legal training or finance training or engineering or architecture, whatever it may be, these persons would excel at a tremendous rate. And that begins to erode the sense of white superiority or white supremacy. Because now when I'm in a classroom with different people from all different backgrounds, and at McGill Law, you have a B curve. So everyone's curved on a B. If you get an A or a B plus, it means you beat the class average. So if I'm getting academic, well, I did get an academic scholarship for the most improved students, because you can imagine that my first semester I was running for mayor was difficult, but I'm getting grades above the class average with a largely homogeneous student body. Now you begin to erode this fictitious idea that whites are superior to blacks. If you put blacks and white kids and all different kids from all different backgrounds in the same class and give them the same opportunities, you're not going to see one race being superior to the other. The person that works the hardest will have the best grades or excel the most, but those fictitious divisions begin to erase.
Balarama,
yeah,
sorry, just a quick question. Thanks for the introduction. Like, the story has been inspiring. One thing that I want to pick on was that, first of all, you might be able to share your screen now, actually, for your slides. You can try that. But I actually have a question for you, because most of us, the attendees, and Anthony and I are student athletes, so most of our lives have been involved with like some serious time management. But like, because it's been so involved in our lives for so long, like lots of our skills are so subconscious. If you're going to speak to someone who's not a student athlete and is going to embark on an endeavor that requires a lot of time management, like basing your skills from the election and being in law school, like what type of skills would you recommend to those people?
That's a good point. So I suppose that not everyone in this room are student athletes. And you don't have to have grit, determination, perseverance, resilience to necessarily be an athlete. You can be anyone with those attributes. And to answer your question, very shortly and in a brief way, that is what's going to demark you from the rest of the crowd, or that is what's going to help you really bring about change and affect change in a meaningful way. And I'll give you a small anecdote, and I think opening up to discussion is going to be valuable as opposed to me just going off on tangents here. When I am forced to collect 15,000 signatures to force the consultation, there are people from all different backgrounds, not just athletes, that are in the streets for 90 days collecting signatures to force a political issue. For those of you, and I want to make a quick comment to athletes, for those of you that are attempting or want to go to the league, and any league that you want to go to, it's pretty simple. It's that if you're on the football team, you're running track and you're in the gym and you're practicing as much as you possibly can. And if you're a basketball player, imagine for a moment that you have to hit 2 free throws to win a championship game, and you got fouled, and you have 2 free throws. And how heavy would your heart be pumping? You know what? It shouldn't even be. You shouldn't even bat an eyelash, because you would have hit thousands and thousands and thousands of free throws in the gym, and you got 2 to hit to get the championship. You're not even nervous. The ones that don't have the grit and the passion and the resilience and that work ethic, your heart would be pounding a million seconds a minute, and you bank it off the front of the rim. And my analogy to athletics is important, and I kind of want to focus on that, is that the resilience, the dedication, and the tools that you get as an athlete will translate to the real world. And that is a key message that you need to take with you well beyond the arenas or the courts that you're currently in.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Balarama. As we said, I think you're free to share your screen or share any pictures if you have any. And
my screen share is still blank. I unfortunately do not have access to screen share at this current time. It's still gray. It says open system preferences. And
you press share at the bottom of the screen, like on the bottom of your screen, it might say share with an arrow.
Yeah, and that share is grayed out, just as it was last time, unfortunately. But it's all good. Let's open it up to questions, and we can go from there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I mean, it's a truly unique story, and it's inspiring to me. Me also as a student athlete, a mixed child with Jamaican and European heritage as well. So thank you so much for sharing. Now we're going to turn to the Q&A portion of the event and ask you just a few series of questions regarding, race, academics, athletics, various issues that, affect the Black community today. And we invite the audience to type their questions in the chat if they have any, and then Rele will read them to our guests, or to our guest Balarama. So the first series of questions I'd like to ask is on your experience as a college athlete and a professional athlete for the Alouettes, and the role of athletics in the Black community. I'm sure we have a lot of McGill students and McGill student athletes in the audience that would like to hear your experience. So first question that I'd like to ask you is, in your time as a student athlete, how did you manage, the balancing demands of athletics and academics?
Yeah, that's, I get that question a lot, and I think that we all have to balance those, but I wouldn't really focus on that too much. My main thing regarding that is, what are your personal standards? In that, are you there to be an average student and an average athlete, or are you there to be a great student and a great athlete? And when you have those standards, you might wake up at 6:30 to get in your first shake and your workout and get to class for 8:30. And when you have that drive, time management gets put into place automatically. And I'll give you a great example. I would have morning runs, I'd go to class, then I worked at Nutrition House, then I'd go to practice, and then I'd go to the gym. And that was basically a day in the life of Balarama Holness at the University of Ottawa. And I was a dual athlete. So I ran track and I played football. So I'm not sitting in my room thinking, oh, I really need to balance my time. What I'm thinking is, I'm going to the Olympics, or I'm going to the CFL, and I'm in a program that is inspiring, and that I am in class and I'm grinding to learn as much as I can. And then when that's your standard, your obstacles and the time management become secondary.
So Balarama,
you're on mute. You're on mute.
Well, Tony, you got it.
Yeah, sorry. I'd just like to I would just like to add, I mean, I think definitely, as athletes, we strive to be to perform at our highest, in every sphere of life. Rel, you had a question that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was going to add, because again, like speaking of our experience at McGill as a fellow student athlete, all the responsibilities you had, do you feel that as a person of color, for example, showing up to class late or missing a workout, do you feel like you were under more pressure as a student athlete of color?
No, we embraced. I think that's a good point. So, do you feel more pressure as a student athlete of color? What I would say to that, in the context of Black History Month, let's welcome the full range of our identity and of our histories. So, indeed, persons of color were enslaved, tortured, beaten, murdered, and lynched. But there's also a Black identity that is resilient, that survived the most egregious act of human atrocity in the history of contemporary society and historic society, which is slavery. That resilience and the strength to still be here, present, thriving, for me, is a sense of pride, and I feel no pressure from, based on my identity, but a sense of pride and a sense of empowerment. My father was a track athlete in Jamaica, one of the fastest. So I'm running 4.4s at combines and getting, okay, sign right here and join my team. So my identity is a source of strength. And the last point I'll mention on that is, in terms of walking in late, whether you're white or Black, it doesn't matter where you're from. That's just irresponsible. Like you have maturity. You have issues of maturity. This has nothing to do with your ethnicity. Hard to pressure and to be proud of who you are. I'll give you a very, very important example. At the University of McGill in the law faculty, there's a course that's based on cultural heritage law and property law that looks at the law related to artifacts and repatriation of different artifacts. And when the Europeans went to what's modern day Nigeria and found those famous masks that we all see, when they compared it to what was happening in Europe, it was similar, if not better, more beautiful, more accurate, more distinct. And what occurred over time is colonial powers would plunder, steal, and take all of these artifacts, put it in their museums, and turn around and tell individuals who were Black that the Black principle is inferior, all while having their wealth and their riches and their art and culture in their museums. So it kind of was imposed on people of color that they were lesser than. But if you actually dig archaeology, like if you look at archaeology and you look at the art and the cultures that developed in Africa and you compared it to European societies, the only difference is that we were not, when I say me, we, the Black community, we're not invading and killing and murdering and torturing and enslaving Europeans. That was just that's the difference, is the use of violence. So if you walk into a room as a Black man, or you're on campus Black man, you should be proud that McGill, which was a former slave owner, that you are now, McGill was a former slave owner. I see eyes like, yes, the University of McGill is established by McGill, who was a slave owner. That's why the wealth of that institution is there, because there were slaves that were assisting the economy of James McGill. You are there through a history of resilience, and you are proud to be a Black man or a Black woman on that campus. And that is not a liability, but a source of empowerment. So there is no pressure. You are proud of who you are, your identity, and your intersectional history.
That's a great answer. Thank you. I like how you broke it down into the sense of pride as opposed to pressure. But we're starting to get a few questions in the Q&A. I'll read the first one. She says, "Thank you for this panel. It's dope to be here with y'all as fellow Black McGill students. Balarama, what actions can athletes take in radically decolonizing structures of oppression in their institutions? Self-education, and what else? In other words, how can we individually partake in the current revolution and begin to decolonize ourselves in order to decolonize these systems?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And you know, the way that I've approached it is kind of fix your own house before you begin to talk about fixing other people's houses or society's houses. So your individual responsibility and success as a student, success as an athlete, success as a brother, as a sister, as a father, as a wife, as a mother, whatever it may be, if you take care of home base, things will begin to work out for society at large. And if everyone takes care of home base and then begins to collectively come together and form those communities, that is where I believe success will happen. It's very difficult to say, I am going to deconstruct these colonial institutions, and how do I go about that? Well, the best thing to do, this might sound, trivial, but being on time to that meeting, having had your nutritious breakfast or lunch before, being prepared, going to your exam prepared. What happens over time is you end up becoming a role model for other men and women who are looking up to you, saying, hey, I could be like this person. I could be a varsity baller at McGill and be in engineering, in the engineering program, and be in law, and whatever it may be. You end up becoming a role model, and now the next generation will be modeling their behavior after you. So all the shoulder, all the weight is on your shoulders. And the last point I'll make on that, and this is in the team context, if you're in a huddle and someone's not there, well, you're not in a huddle. You're only in a huddle when everyone is there and you 1, 2, 3 break. In other words, if you are falling out to the margins and you're failing out and you're not doing your duty, well, ultimately you are strengthening the structure, because not everyone is going to be empowered in order to, if you will, abolish that structure. So as long as you start taking care of home base, and then when you take care of home base, then you can start empowering and building others, building capacity, and that's how collectively you could change something for the next generation. But don't underestimate your individual action, that what you do in your everyday behaviors that could then strengthen not just you, but people around you. And then one day you don't become an influencer on Instagram, you actually become a role model for the next generation.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And now that we're talking about the role of blackness in athletics, I wanted to turn to something that Cornel West said. So Cornel West writes about the centrality of excellence and the exploitation of Black athletes in North American life. So in your view, does the experience of Black people in athletics veer more towards excellence or exploitation?
Exploitation, period. And the only way that it would veer towards, it's not about excellence, it's towards empowering the Black community. There's only one way it would happen, in my view. It's if you could show everyone in the NCAA that it's a billion-dollar industry and it's modern day slavery, and that they should all be getting minimum $100,000 a year, and you show it through empowering them through history, empowering them through other means of educating who they are, and say, you're going to have to boycott for 1 year and you're going to do it for the next generation, then you might advance slowly but surely. But what happens is, it's very hard to start a revolution when your belly is empty and you're struggling to feed yourself. Like NCAA athletes say, after the game, I can't even buy myself dinner. I have to go home on an empty stomach. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to give you the bare minimum. You're not eating after game days. You have to come back on Monday to eat. And it's the epitome of modern day exploitation, in the same way that the 13th Amendment in the United States of America, I believe it's 13, that has, if you are enslaved, involuntary servitude is still constitutional. So I can incarcerate you and force you to work. That's modern day slavery. The NCAA is another form of exploitation, and it's going to remain as such until there's a boycott, and they'll say, we're not going to play this season. But do you think an athlete with a Fulbright scholarship to Texas Tech or whatever, Alabama, is not going to take that scholarship when they have no food on their table. Like, you know, I'm living in social housing with my twin brother and my dad who's hoarding, and I'm gonna say no. I'm going to refuse, you know, school because or a scholarship because I'm gonna boycott for a year. Not gonna happen. So by keeping people at the basement of society, keeping them hungry, keeping them profiled, it's pretty easy to control them. So it's not even close to excellence.
I mean, considering the NCAA then, for example, like the top athletes in NCAA, like for example, Zion Williamson, like of course he wasn't getting paid at Duke, but he was making a lot of money. We know from endorsements, maybe under the table. So like, could you look at that as an example of how, as a Black community, excellence is the only way to not be exploited, as opposed to like a non-Black person might be able to go through life and get a fair, you know, compensation for their actions. But as Black people, we have to be excellent to not be exploited.
Sure, but you know, I want to move away from excellence because I don't call that excellence. Excellence is when you eat and everyone else eats. That's excellence. Excellence is not one student athlete getting paid and having a couple million Instagram followers, and that's not excellence. Black excellence is intersectional and it's communal. It's that there is a emancipatory culture and a culture of freedom and of increased home ownership, reduced wealth gap, decreased representation in prisons. That's Black excellence. Buying fancy jewelry and having a lot of followers on Instagram and getting signed by Nike is not Black excellence. That's rugged individualism.
So then what would be your advice, you know, to the Black children who grow up in, you know, communities where schools are underfunded, you know, job opportunities are scarce and athletics is the only opportunity out of their situation?
That's I got saved by structural support at the University of McGill with your coaches that are like mentors and fathers and brothers. My daughter right now is at daycare. The people who are taking care of my daughter are basically like their second parents, whether you like it or not. Your coaches, and my experience, coaches are an important factor in assisting the transgression, the ascension rather, and the transition to being able to approach. Let me be a little bit like flexible. Approach excellence. So your coach ends up becoming an important factor, and the way that you can even come in contact with the coach, even say at McGill, is you have to get accepted. I wasn't even looked at when I was balling when the McGill coaches came because I didn't even have the grades. So you have to start decolonizing and reducing the stringent measures and evaluations and assessment of entering into universities. It has to become, it is very affordable. For that, there's no excuse in Canada. But allowing students and giving them the chance of succeeding in these institutions. And you know, that's a strong question. And I'll just end on this. I received my application acceptance from McGill Law at almost like the deadline. Like I was one of the last applicants to get in. And mind you, I have straight A's in my master's. I have straight A's in Teachers College. And I was going in with 3 degrees, having traveled to 15 countries, worked across the world, did international development, did all these things, ended up going in, becoming a model student, used on all their banners to raise millions of dollars, beat class average, and I'm one of the last to get into the program. So in other words, we have to be able to see the talent and the potential of young boys and girls who are disenfranchised and don't have the correct support systems and bring them into these very, very important educational institutions. And by having, last point, by having such stringent entry measures, well, it makes it extremely, extremely difficult for people to access these privileged institutions, and McGill is an extremely privileged institution.
Yes, that's very true. I saw Coach Ryan chuckle when you mentioned the coaches not looking at certain athletes, because I know Ryan has that struggle getting guys into McGill sometimes. We have about 10 minutes left, and there's a few more Q&As, so I'll get to those. There's one saying, the consultation on systemic racism was a strong political movement. What is your next political objective?
So that's a good point. If some of you, by the way, if any of you want to volunteer for Montreal in Action, athlete or not, the door is always open. Easy to get in contact with. But so right now, there are 38 recommendations that came from the consultation. It costed over $1 million. And there are city officials and community organizations working to implement these 38 recommendations. And it's everything from employment to housing, to economic inequality, to racial profiling, to infrastructure, to urban planning. And right now, we are working on implementing those recommendations. Also, we're working closely with the federal government. Justice Lametti, Minister of Justice, we became professional, I don't want to say friends, but we became closer over the years. And if you've noticed in the news just recently, there were some important amendments to the criminal code to abolish mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses and others that, and we've seen judges will ultimately give disproportionately high sentences to minority communities for the same crimes as their white counterparts. So important legislation has tackled that. So we're working on issues of federal jurisdiction and also of municipal jurisdiction. And lastly, education is always important. We're now pressuring the Minister of Education here in Quebec to reform a curriculum to make sure it's more inclusive, to include Black history. You probably don't know the name Marc-Joseph Angélique or Olivier Lejeune. If you went to school in Quebec, you should understand that there were over 4,000 slaves between the 17th and 19th century. You should understand that slavery existed in Quebec, and that's an important part of our collective history. So those are all the different things we're doing across all 3 jurisdictions. And if that sounds like gibberish to you, well, good. Come and learn about different elements of law, of politics, of economy, of culture. And it's a real, I would say, nurturing experience to really, really engage your community.
Hey, just a quick question here.
Yeah.
So as you speak, we talk about, breaking the change and bringing about some different opportunities. Can you speak to what I believe is really important is unified leadership within our community? I think everyone can see it. Everyone knows that we need to make change, but we're so fractured in our ability, in our works, that we now are not as empowered as we could be if there was some unified leadership. How do we get there?
That is, if I had that answer, I don't think we'd even be here. I think there'd be like, Black history would be in the curriculum, and criminal justice reform would be long, like that would be done a long time ago. That's the Achilles heel, is that we'll put it this way, there are over 250 different ethnicities in the Black community. So that's step one, is that this is not a homogenous group of persons. When I ran for mayor, and I didn't get into this because we're limited in time, but when I ran for mayor of Montreal North, they were saying you're half white, your dad's Jamaican, we're Haitian, and you're Anglophone, and we're French. So those divisions exist in the Black community, and I would say, as in conclusion, the day that those divisions in the Black community become resolved is the day that there are going to be significant strides. And just look in terms of voting block. City Hall is homogenous. Montreal has a third visible minorities. All they would have to do is go out and vote, and you can have basically a truly representative democracy in city halls or in parliament, whether it's Senate or House of Commons. Not Senate, you don't vote in the Senate, but the House of Commons, and you would have a truly representative democracy. Why did I angle this to politics? Is because that's who decides who gets what. The definition of politics is who gets what. There's no sports center in Montreal North. We have a $5 billion budget. Well, people who represent those boroughs can fund a sports center. But you're never going to get that if there's divisions in society and people are fractured and you're not having people voting in blocks or moving in one direction. And yeah, you're right, Coach. That's kind of the Achilles heel, is that there are divisions in society, including the Black community.
So we're coming close, and I'll allow Raleigh and Anthony to wrap this up in a minute because I think they've done a great job. But the last thing I want to say to you is this. First of all, you asked about if anyone wants to join and help out your team. You got me. I'm there 100%. I think you're doing great things. One of the reasons I think this is strong, is really is important, is Black men, I think, need to take greater initiative. I think Black women have held us down for the most. You see a lot of single parent families, and it's the Black women who are working hard and trying to nurture and try to grind through. And I think I saw it as a responsibility, and I'm so happy that you're doing what you're doing. And hopefully this will help more Black men to be inspired and to pick up the sword and go to it as well. So thank you very much on my behalf, on behalf of Department of Athletics and Recreation. It was great to have you here, and I'll let the two young men finish up.
Yeah, like Coach Ryan said, it was an honor to have you. Any closing words from you? I think you want to like let the community know.
Well, yeah, and just in closing, Coach is right in that Montreal in Action at one point had 90% women and that are dedicated and volunteering and or in paid positions. And yeah, there has been, I would say, weaknesses in regards to advocacy with men, but oddly enough, in the media, you're going to see more men of color speaking on these issues. So there's a very odd patriarchal system that is going on. So we also need men to understand that we're also in a patriarchal system and to not only contribute, but be aware of your surroundings and how you with all persons and giving space to women when it counts. And in last point, the higher you go in management, not only the more white it gets, but the more male it gets. So it's not just about contributing, but the way that you contribute. And yeah, so we need men to not only join, but to be aware of their compassion, their tolerance, and the ways in which they're interacting with everyone around them. And hopefully, you know, you guys can volunteer, can join, and we could make things move here in Montreal.
Definitely, and we'll definitely try push get more people to come out to Montréal en Action. I know I would definitely love to do some work with you guys. And yeah, thank you so much, Balarama, for attending, giving us your point of view on things, your perspective. It was a great experience. We'd also like to thank everyone who attended, and I don't know if you wanted to say anything more, Balarama.
No, I'm good, but I guess if you allow me to, hey, you saw the Olympics, right? The Olympics is a great way to bring people together. You see sports. Sports is a great way to bring people together. So when the pandemic is over, we might have to organize like a charity basketball tournament outdoors with some barbecue or something. Bring people together. Sometimes those little acts of community go a long way. So we'll leave it at that.
For sure. Thank you so much, Balarama. Thank you everybody for coming out and showing support during Black History Month. And have a good weekend, everyone.
Cheers.